Joe. I know some of the people here, some family and friends. I want to thank Saunders and Steve, Mr. Mazzola. They're doing a great job involving us today. Steve had asked me if I would be interested in coming to the dinner tonight, and I said, well, you know, I've got something to do. He says, well, I'd like you to introduce Joe. And I said, well, that's easy, because you get to roast him a little bit. I said, okay. But I thought I'd wing it, and after talking to my wife and presenting it to her, she said, you better write it down. So I'm going to just take a few minutes, and I want to talk about Joe. I first met Joe when I came to the central office in Yonkers High School, in the Yonkers Board of Ed. And when I think back on it now, it seems not so long ago, but it was. Back then I had much less belly, and Joe had a little more hair. Remembering that first day meeting him at work, he was buzzing around the office and opening and closing drawers and cabinets and scratching his head while searching for something, which reminded me of the mad scientist in his lab. Little did I know then that he was only doing what we today call multitasking. I soon learned that this behavior is totally normal for Joe. It's just part of his genetic DNA. He gets an idea into his head, focuses on it, and gets it in his sights, and then bam, off it goes. Now I could easily stand here and run down the list of awards, adorning his walls in the office, like the 10 or more awards for excellence in graphic design, awards for excellence in website design, or how Joe's photographic artwork was shown in galleries throughout Westchester. I can even perhaps mention how he was chosen as the Employee of the Year for Yonkers High School, or how Saunders now has his award-winning design logo hanging outside their building. But instead of talking about his achievements, I'd like to point out some of his equally significant achievements in my mind. For instance, for many years, Joe was the organizer of the employee softball team, and some of us are here tonight who's played on the softball team. You might say big deal, but don't misunderstand me. He also appointed himself the team captain. But as a matter of fact, organizing our softball teams was a big deal, you see, because our team, which was co-ed, we were just out to have some fun after work, lost some steam. While most of the other teams were really out for blood. They were out for our blood. And even so, Joe made certain that everyone on the team got into every game, every time we played, even though sometimes he didn't play, which happened more often than you would think. Most of the team members, including myself, we forget how we used to complain to him about everything, having to practice, which was unheard of. The muddy fields that we had to play on in Saunders High School. Also how the other teams were so good. You know. And the other teams were always so good, or even the craft uniforms that we had. But I remember them. And I also remember that we used to get beat by these teams badly. We lost, and we lost a lot.
That sounds like art.
Now for anybody who knows Joe, the fact that losing, especially in baseball, it's not on his agenda. He also somehow got me and about 20 other people, some of us are here tonight, to play in several yearly softball charity events for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, which, by the way, were held in February. In dead of winter, they were called the snowball tournaments. And they were a lot of fun, but that's a whole other story. So yes, running the softball teams was a big deal, but truly generous, selfless, and class act. There are many, many more stories I can tell you about Joe. Too many to mention here except this one. It was about April 2004, and the hated Boston Red Sox were coming to town to take on our Yankees. And Joe asked me if I wanted to go to the game that night with a friend, Angela. He insisted I go with them, but I could not offer him any money for the ticket. And I said, really? The hottest ticket in town for free? My mama didn't raise any fools, so we jumped on the train and off we went. Now, it's not so much that he took me and Angelo to the game to see the Yankees, and all for free. It's what happened that night, 10 years ago, in the stadium, that I'd like to mention to you all gathered here tonight, just to set the mood. It was a cold, clammy, early April night at Yankee Stadium, not the best for baseball or baseball fans. sitting there in the cold drizzle. Not only were we cold, wet, and cranky, but we had to contend with all the Boston Red Sox fans that made the trip down I-95, and there were a lot of them. In particular, there was this one little brat who sat directly in front of us, proudly wearing his entire Red Sox uniform, cheering wildly for his team. Great, now we gotta listen to this guy. Screaming all night long, and the Yankees were getting killed on the scoreboard. 11-0. So this kid's yelling and screaming at us because the Yankees are getting killed, and you know, Steve, when you got to take it. What are you gonna do? So brave kid, you know, I said, wow, someone dressed up like that, they're wrong. Well, so at one point, his big burly dad, who himself was proudly wearing his New England Patriots Super Bowl champs leather jacket, turned to us and asked if we mind keeping an eye on his son. To take a walk. Sure, we grinned back down, little Brian. No problem. So for the next 10 minutes or so, Angela and I relentlessly taunted and threw popcorn at Brian, all about giving him the business, which, Steve, you know, we gotta do. It's our right as Yankees fans. I even said, right, Steve? We even schemed up a quick plan, Angela and I, how we could dump little Brian upside down in a garbage can, and then make our escape to another section before Big Brian returned. You get the picture. At about that time, Joe had also disappeared to go check out the Yankees gift shop, as if he needed any more Yankee paraphernalia. Poor little Brian was left to us for a few more precious minutes, and we made the most of it, believe me. Now, to his credit, as Boston continued to run up the score, 11-2, which I showed you, little Brian gave it right back. He was yelling and screaming, "Red Sox rule! Red Sox rule!" And this is little Brian screaming, "Red Sox rule! Red Sox rule!"
What about the ones he's not showing?
So when his dad, Big Brian, Big Brian returned, he offered us each a nice cold beer for watching out for his son. And I remember thinking at the time, it's a pretty classy move, as I was trying to brush the popcorn out of little Brian's hair. And it's what happened next that I remember the most from that night.
Joe Panella.
As Joe returned from the gift shop, he stopped one row down, turned to face little Brian, and asked him to stand up. I thought, oh, he's going to dump a soda on his head. This is going to be sweet. But then it happened. Joe reached in and pulled out a red, white, and blue Yankees logo pin
Oh, he gave it to
out of
Ralph
his pocket. And he ceremoniously pinned little Brian right in his Red Sox uniform. Little Brian and Joe put the pin on his uniform. To a Red Sox fan. He actually did this, Steve. In Yankee Stadium. His dad, Big Brian, then stood up and reached over to us, offering his hand, and said, "Wow, you guys are a truly class act." And I was more than a little humbled, and just a little bit embarrassed for the way I was razzing little Brian. But after all, he was one of them. So, little Brian then proceeded to grab the bucket-sized popcorn that I had in my hand, and he dumped it right on my head, holding me by my jersey and dumping it right on my head. This is the Yankee Stadium. So, first, how could I get mad? I had it coming. Secondly, Big Brian was right there. Thirdly, since we were all laughing so hard at the time, I actually didn't mind it. It was funny. You know, I had it coming. This brings me to the point about Joe. He has this uncanny way about him of disarming people. By that I mean, because of Joe, I could actually laugh while some little brat Boston Red Sox fan in a Boston uniform in Yankee Stadium is dumping popcorn in my head. How can this be? I attribute this unlikely scenario to the power of Joe. He somehow makes believers out of critics and friends out of enemies.
Do we have another picture?
His mom and dad are surely smiling down on him right now. And I'm sure they're extremely proud of the person he has become and the man that he is. So Joe, for including every one of us in your life schemes or big plans, and especially for including me, I say thank you. And ladies and gentlemen,
First off, I'd like to thank my beautiful wife Jen, my family and friends for joining me this evening to celebrate this honor with me. I also want to thank the Saunders Italian American Club for choosing me as one of the honorees. I'm very honored. I kept asking myself, what am I going to say tonight? I guess I should say something about my Italian heritage, but what? So I thought about it for a while, and I decided I would take this opportunity to recognize some of the Italian-American teachers I had throughout my life who had a positive influence on me. The first teacher that I can remember was my phys ed teacher back in school 16 in the early 70s, Coach Tony Rippolo.
The same teacher, I guess.
I remember thinking how cool he was. He was like the coolest teacher in school. I was a small, skinny kid, and I always struggled to compete in gym class. And he taught me to always play hard and never give up. Angela Pagano was my English teacher at Emerson Middle School.
Oh, wow.
She was tough. She taught me that if you work hard and you take the time to study, it'll pay off. I also had the pleasure of working with her at Central Office until she retired a few years ago. Next is Dan Visello, also from Emerson. He taught offset printing and mechanical drafting. I guess you could say that he was one of the first teachers to recognize my artistic abilities. He was also a tough teacher, and I remember that he would always say he would never give hundreds out on his drawing exams. So I remember getting a 99 once. My drawing was as perfect as could be, but he managed to find a flaw and take a point. He taught me to strive for perfection. Little did I know how much of what I learned in his class would be applied many years later in my career. Moving on to Saunders, Neil Abatello was my geometry teacher freshman year. He was always upbeat and so full of energy, you never knew when he was going to call on you. He taught me to always be prepared. Sal Mancini was one of my architecture teachers sophomore year. He got me my first job working at Fuller and D'Angelo Architects and Planners when I was just 15 years old. He was the first person who made me believe that I had the skills to be an architect. And even though I didn't pursue that career, it was a huge boost to my self-esteem, and I'll always remember it. Enzo Antonelli, my English teacher, he was a character. Always joking around, but somehow he managed to teach us in between his funny stories. I remember him telling me, always be proud of who you are and where you came from. Next up is Vincent Calabello.
Oh, yeah.
He was the art teacher at Saunders. He was truly a master at his craft. He always took the time to sit with me and tell me what was good and what was not so good about whatever drawing assignment I was working on. He taught me to always push myself, choose the more difficult task, and you'll become a better artist. Last, but certainly not least, is my dear friend and architecture teacher, Gene Vetrano. Of all my teachers, Gene has had the biggest impact on my life. I kept in touch with Gene after graduation, but it wasn't until about 5 years later that we reconnected. There was an ad in the paper for a graphic designer for the Yonkers Public Schools. When I saw this, the first thing I did was call Gene, who had made the move over to Central Office a few years earlier. He told me, don't worry about it. I know who runs that department, I'll talk to him. The rest is history. I've been there 22 years, and still counting. Gene has meant so much to me. He's taught me many life lessons throughout the years, too many to count. He's truly been my mentor throughout my career in the Honors. So as you can see, there certainly was no shortage of Italian-American influences in my life, and I'm very proud of who I am today because of it.